Recovery podcast is real life stories from everyday people in recovery. From mental health issues, trauma, substance misuse, and behavioural addictions. Please visit the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for links to social media and a range of books written by your podcast host, Bren Coy.
Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast. Hope you're doing well. This episode of the podcast is with an old friend of mine called Rawiri, and he is native to New Zealand and lives in London currently. So I met him many years ago. We've always stayed in touch via social media and bump into each other every now and then when I'm down in London, and it was just a really cool conversation. Rawiri's got a great take on recovery and on life in general. He's a very positive person, very creative. He's a musician and an author, and he's just an all-round top bloke. So I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed speaking with Rawiri.
I'm Rawiri, and I'm from paradise, actually. I'm from one of the most beautiful countries in the world, which is New Zealand. And it's interesting to me when I think back on like my life and kind of where the trajectory has gone, because there is nothing in my childhood that would lead people to think that I was an obvious candidate for alcoholism or addiction of any sort, and I've met a lot of addicts, I've met a lot of alcoholics in the time that I've been sober and in recovery, and there are certain people where you hear their stories and you go, well, damn, I don't think there was much choice for you, like the environments they come from, the behaviors they learned early on, whereas I didn't have that. I grew up in a very middle-class family. I'm originally from Auckland, New Zealand, and I grew up in a very normal childhood. I had two parents. Those parents were, at home. I had a twin brother. I had an older sister. It was a very standard Kiwi kind of upbringing, and that's the other thing. Like, I have two siblings, including a twin brother, so legitimately someone who's occupied the same amount of time on earth as I have, who is completely normal in this sense. Like, he's not a big drinker. He's got drunk, a few times, but his attitude towards it's not the same. He's not into drugs, not even a little bit. He's had maybe 3 puffs of a durry in his entire life. And it's just not in him. And I find it bizarre. I look at him and I think he's bizarre. We had two very different attitudes towards life. And it's that kind of difference between him and I that makes me think that some people are just born to be different in that sense. We grew up with the same rules, grew up with the same values and morals. And I am 100% an alcoholic and 100% an addict. And he is none of those things.
Interestingly, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I think I mentioned this on the last podcast that I did, but it was a neuroscientist, and he was basically talking about nature nurture, and he was saying that he wasn't specifically talking about addiction, but he was talking about any character traits that you have and why are siblings so different, and and he did mention addiction. He said, why are some people addicts and some people aren't, and what he actually said was, and I don't know whether this later as I hear your story, this might make more sense. But what he said was, when it comes to nurture, as in your environment, he said it's not your family home that you're influenced by the most. It's actually your friends. So it's your social circle, like as you're growing up through school and the people that you hang around with outside of school. That influences you more than your actual parental home in terms of the way you turn out and the character traits that you have, which I thought was absolutely astonishing, actually, because I always presumed it was your family home that, you know, that would kind of like program you a certain way.
I think that makes sense, you know, and I had a very, I mean, I didn't even go to the same high school as my brother. You
Okay.
know, we went to we went to school in a place called Palmerston North, not a big city, and actually all three of us kids went to three different high schools in that one city.
Right.
And how do I say this? So I'm mixed race. I'm Maori and I'm New Zealand European. I'm very nicely golden brown, olive skinned, tattooed now quite significantly, but I look very Maori. And although my twin brother and my sister are also mixed race, they don't look it at all. They're very white. And so I understand what you're saying. I think there's a lot to that. My social circle at high school and that kind of stuff was very varied. I sort of jumped from social group to social group,
Yeah.
and quite liked being someone who could do that, a bit of a chameleon. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the want to be the chameleon came earlier. You know, I think I was much younger, about 7, when I realized that the way that I processed the world was a bit different. And I think part of that was to do with the color. You know, every time we met someone, I remember my twin brother is white with blonde hair and blue eyes. We do not look alike, right? And it's funny now. I get it. It's funny. But when you're a kid and you meet people and you're meeting teachers or schoolmates or whatever, and you're introduced, it's always a thing of you're different. And it wasn't that, okay, yes, we were different from each other, but I look different to the rest of my family. Even my mum, who's Maori, doesn't look, I mean, she looks pretty fair, especially in winter. So, you know, family photos and stuff, I did look like the cousin who came to stay. And I think there's only so much of that you can take on board when you're a kid before you start to internalize it as, you know, difference wasn't necessarily a good thing, because the look on people's faces was sometimes quite jarring. And I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, you know. And had I been a rational kid like my brother or sister was, maybe I wouldn't have internalized it. But I was a sensitive kid. And I very much was into fantasy, you know. I liked books and TV and movies, and my aspirations as a kid was to be the Black Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, whereas any other boy in New Zealand wanted to be an All Black. You know.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think I would have just preferred to be anybody other than me. Wasn't very good at sitting in my skin or living in my head, and that's why I think I gravitated towards different people. I had a very I wasn't, or maybe I should say I was quite open. I wasn't very judgmental about the types of people that I hung out with, but I think because I was unsure about who I was, I would, you know, hang out with people, and not all of them came from great backgrounds, and that sometimes meant that there was easier access to, you know, alcohol, drugs, and I learned pretty quickly that once I started taking them, that I had quite a good disposition for it, like quite a good body for it. I don't know why that is, but I do distinctly remember in those early like drinking experiences being much better at it than my peers. Like I could drink anything. I'd never vomited. I'd get drunk and wasted, and you know there were blackouts and stuff. But I'd get up the next morning and it wouldn't wear on me. I wasn't someone who got hangovers, you know. And even people would comment on it. So it became a little bit like a point of pride. Like it's like a superpower. I was like, I can do anything. And of course, sorry.
Your Power Ranger power.
Well, yeah. So they all had like dinosaurs, and I had, you know, tequila.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's no surprise. Like for someone who was a bit insecure and weird, you know, the feeling that alcohol gives you in those initial, you know, drinks of feeling relaxed and connected to people and a bit cool and confident and charming and funny and talented, and all of the things that I wasn't good at manifesting on my own, alcohol gave me that. And so I think there was like a very romantic idealization I had of alcohol, and it made me feel good. So I invested in the relationship, you know. I loved alcohol. I thought alcohol loved me. And then, I woke up at 27 realizing I was in an abusive relationship, but it took a long time for me to kind of understand that. In New Zealand, we have this kind of saying of like, go hard or go home. And I was always a good student, not a great student, but a good student. I was very hardworking. I had a job from the age of 15, so I was earning my own money. I had a car. I paid for everything myself. I was hanging out with a lot of older people because I was working, and I'd go to clubs and that kind of stuff. But I'd still go to school. I'd leave school during the day to go get high, but then I'd come back for my classes. So I think, trying to like fulfill all these different types of roles, I think. And also not thinking there was anything wrong with it. But ambitious as well. Like I really wanted to leave my mark on the world, and I had lofty, dreams of myself. Certainly to get out of a place like Palmerston North, which is I think even John Cleese ripped the piss out of Palmerston North when he went on a tour down under somewhere. Not a lot going on there. Not a lot. I go back now. It's lovely. The town center is perfect. The lawns are perfectly manicured, but shit, there just wasn't a lot to do. And I wanted to leave as soon as I pretty much could. I went to film school, great, met a whole bunch of creative people. My drinking and drug use really took off when I didn't have, close family and friends around me. Just continued to drink and drug without really much thought of the consequences, even though there were consequences. At 19, when you nearly burn down your flat because you're passed out, you can kind of laugh it off because it's kind of funny at 19. Or if you wake up somewhere in Wellington where, because you've scored someone and you don't know where you are, that's also kind of funny at 19. But you get older and it's the same kind of stuff. And again, like the physical hangovers, I never really got, but I did start to, as I got older, I started to get these like psychologically not feeling too great about my behavior. Waking up feeling a little bit like dread, going, oh, Jesus Christ, what have I done? Who have I said what to? Who have I tried to score? Who do I need to apologize to? All that kind of stuff, like dealing with guilt and shame initially on Sundays and then, pretty much the week round until I left New Zealand, which I did when I was 20. I think I just turned 24. And if you'd asked me why I left New Zealand at the time, bear in mind, it really is one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. I would have told you that I was bored. I would have told you that there was nothing for me. And I was a bit better than New Zealand anyway, and I needed to go and, be somebody in a place like London. And London only because I couldn't have got into America. My grandfather was English. He wasn't American. If he was, I would have been in New York probably. That was always my dream as a kid. But I think what really happened is that I had run out of places to drink at, and I'd run out of people to lie to,
You'd burn out bridges.
What's that?
You'd burn all your bridges?
I mean, look, I always had plenty of friends. I had good friends, and with them, I was pretty solid. But I always felt the need to lie about what I'd done and who I was because I didn't feel like I was good enough as is. And the problem with that is you go out on like a night out, and Wellington's not even that big a place either. So you go to I knew all the clubs, I knew all the bouncers, and you go in and I would see people that I knew and I'd think, oh, Jesus, all right, I need to make sure that person doesn't speak to that person because I've told them conflicting stories about this one thing. So let's keep them apart, and just having to like the mental pressure of just having to like scan the room and figure out the plan of attack is just exhausting. No wonder I was exhausted most of the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, rather than actually deal with what was going on for me, I'd just leave again, which is what I was very good at. When things got a bit too much, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to change the scene and change the external, and I'll be fine. And I came to London really thinking that things would be different, and they weren't really. I mean, the scenery was different, a lot more people, a lot more anonymity, and I think that kind of helped to fuel the drinking and the drugging and the partying.
Well, just before we get into London, it's interesting because listening to what you said there about your kind of like early childhood leading up to where we're at now in the story, it makes me kind of think that it doesn't really matter, for what reason you feel that way, how you felt like you didn't basically fit in, and you kind of like had all these different masks and the different personalities for the different friendship groups and stuff like that, which I completely relate to because I was exactly the same, and I also desperately wanted to get out of the place where I was living and desperately wanted to make my mark on the world. As you said, I wanted to kind of be somebody and do something special. And I was just thinking about that feeling when you're young, because obviously not everybody has that feeling, but we all do. And anybody that comes into into recovery, and you go to meetings and you listen to them share and stuff, the majority of people share something along those lines, don't they? And it doesn't matter whether they've had a good upbringing or a terrible upbringing, or like they're both parents, or the parents split up, or they were abused, or anything like that. It always comes down to that thing of like not feeling comfortable in their own skin. And ultimately, like, recovery for me is what changes that, where you do become comfortable in your own skin over a period of time as you do the work, and it kind of like enables you to live in the world with peace of mind. And that's the thing I never had because I never felt comfortable. Is that the same for you?
I completely agree with that. And I mean, you talk about peace of mind, and that's the thing that I talk a lot about that when I speak to, especially new people into recovery, and I'll come to why that became such a big selling point for me. But I always, I was such an unhappy person. I was good at smiling. I have a very nice smile, great teeth, but it was only genuine a very small percentage of the time. And you touched on this about how anybody who becomes, or certainly the ones who are in recovery, I think there's an overarching thread, regardless of background and regardless of circumstance, that, you just weren't very comfortable in who you are. And that is only a very small percentage of the population, because as you pointed out, most people, even if they go through hard stuff, are a bit more, I don't know, just emotionally resonant.
Yeah.
Much more comfortable with who they are. And I thought it was a happiness issue. And I knew that I was unhappy. I knew that I wasn't very happy. And so you look for things to kind of fix. And, you look at the world of advertising, and it's predicated on pointing out the things that are making you unhappy so that they can provide you a product to fulfill that happiness. And you learn in recovery, there is no such thing. There's no pill, there's no course, there's no program that, like, if you take it, will manifest happiness for you. I think the only way to manifest happiness is to do the work internally on what's going on in your head. Well, certainly that was the case for me. If there was a pill to make me happy, I would have taken it. In fact, I was on a whole bunch of antidepressants at one point because I was depressed. And it didn't fix me,
No, they're not going to work long term, are they?
Well, I think the problem is what it does for you in the short term is stop you from being so depressed that you might do something you regret. And as somebody who was a self-harmer and suicidal, that was, I suppose, in that sense, it did the job, but it doesn't deal with any of the things that precipitate you feeling depressed about who you are. So it's treating, you know, it's treating a symptom, sorry, rather than the cause.
Yeah, the underlying issues just just remain without any interrogation, don't they?
They do. And look, I feel some sort of way about it when we talk about like medications and stuff, and I'm certainly not a doctor, so I think listen to your doctor. I also think, you know, I went to doctors and I lied very much. I lied a lot about how I was feeling, what I was doing, and I also lied a lot about what I was drinking and drugging. Partly out of embarrassment and guilt, because I knew that what I intook was a hell of a lot. But I also think partly out of fear, because a part of me must have known that if I was honest with them about how much I was consuming, they would tell me there was a problem, and I didn't want the problem to be alcohol or drugs. I wanted them to tell me I was a nut job, and here are the pills for being a nut job, and you'll stop being a nut job. Because that's towards the last couple of years of my using, it was very much in public. I would put on a front and make it look like I was having a great time. And then when I wasn't around other people, it was, you know, yelling and screaming at the voices in my head, which, you know, weren't Disney voices. They were Texas Chainsaw voices. And, you know, like yelling in public and people crossing the streets to avoid me. And it was panic attacks like every day. And, you know, okay 1 minute and then overcome by depression the next, and wanting to do something about it, and then self-harming and all these really, really like gross, unhealthy behaviors. But I also, I mean, I wasn't very good at asking for help. And like I mentioned, I also didn't want there to be a problem. I certainly didn't want alcohol and drugs to be the problem. And I think that comes back to this idea that although it was damaging, I had a real kind of romantic feeling towards substances, because they did make me feel good, even if they would then make me feel terrible afterwards. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, because they're the solution to your problem at that time, aren't they? And you know, you have this like you said right at the very beginning, you have this relationship with these substances because they do make you feel good initially, but obviously they make you feel terrible after you've used, and especially when you're using consistently. So you're not going to give up something that essentially helps you deal with your emotional pain very easily. Like you're very reluctant to say this is the problem, because you know that that's what's kind of holding you together. Yeah.
No, I think that's true. Ironically, and I mentioned this before, but I really do think it was, I was 27 before I realized that I'd been this romantic relationship of substances that I'd been in with for 15 years, I think, at that point. I didn't realize it was abusive. I abused the alcohol and the drugs, and they abused me straight back. And I used to be very judgmental about people in abusive relationships, like legitimate abusive relationships, because I would think to myself, if they're abusive and they're not good for you, then you get out of that relationship. Yeah. And then, shame on me, I became an addict, or maybe I was always an addict. And, I was doing exactly the same thing that I was casting, judgment about. Yeah. And now I understand. I have a hell of a lot more empathy. It's not as simple as, even when I identified that there was something wrong, the day that I first was sober, it wasn't because I was like, oh, well, you're an alcoholic and an addict, so don't drink. No, I thought I was just nuts. I thought I was batshit crazy. And I thought that I thought drinking and drugging made the batshit crazy worse. So if I didn't drink and drug for a month, then I would be, back to normal. That I would be restored to sanity, as we sometimes refer to it as, and then I can just drink the rest of the summer. I got sober in June, so it was peak summer, which is never when you want to give up. And do you know what? It was only after sort of looking back at 5 days, I think, sober, and I went off to Pamplona and went running with the bulls. And not only did I run with the bulls on the first day, and like the high and the whole chasing that feeling, the adrenaline,
Yeah.
it was so similar to chasing the drugs, chasing the alcohol, that when it was all over, I sat in the arena and I went, okay, well, that's over. I'm going to have to do that again tomorrow, because now what else do I have? And so I ran with the bulls the second day. Like, and even though I wasn't drinking there, and people thought it was very strange, because when I met those types of people, I used to party with them a lot. It was only at, I think, the reunion party a couple of weeks later in London, and I still wasn't drinking, and they still thought it was weird. And one of my mates at the time was like, "Why are you not drinking? What are you, an alcoholic or something?" And I was so offended by the suggestion that I caused a bit of a scene and had to leave. And I was angry, because I thought, how freaking dare you call me an alcoholic? Who do you think you are? Blah blah blah. And this idea of being an alcoholic went around in my head for a couple of days, non-stop. It was all I could think about. I was consumed until I got home and Googled whether or not I was an alcoholic. And experience tells me that if you have to Google whether or not you're an alcoholic, it's probably a good chance you have a drinking problem. Because what it does is it takes you to the website with like a questionnaire about your drinking.
Yeah.
Lied my ass off, still recommended like a support group, a meeting, like a 12-step meeting. I was horrified. I was. But with no other options, I went, Jesus, let me try it out and see what happens.
It's funny as well. You mentioned about the dopamine high. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was about 6 years ago, when I changed careers and I started working in prisons as a drug and alcohol counsellor. And did that for a few years. And whilst I was doing that, I was doing a counselling level 3, like counselling skills, and I was like reading all these books and stuff. And I wrote my first book, which was called Addiction Prevention. And when I wrote that book, I was obviously researching addiction, and I was researching the neuroscience of addiction. And you know what, it actually turned out, and I'm sure you're aware of this anyway, but it turned out that every single substance addiction and every single behavioral addiction, so from sex to gambling to shopping to video games to alcohol, drugs, you name it, every single addiction has not exactly the same, but affects the dopamine reward pathways in the brain and the neuroepinephrine in varying ways, depending on the drug and the behavior, but ultimately they all do exactly the same thing. So whatever it is that we're doing, if it activates that region of the brain, an addict cannot stop. That we just have to keep going. We have to keep chasing that behavior or chasing that substance. And that just completely made absolute sense to me, because even though I'd never become a cocaine addict or got addicted to any other drugs in particular, and alcohol was always my main substance, it didn't matter what I did. And it was the same with relationships where sex was concerned. It was the same with the gym, for example. Everything that I did, it always had to be obsessive and compulsive. And I'm still the same now. So, when you were talking about that abusive relationship, I've done a lot of work over 10 years on myself, but I've still come to this place where when it comes to sugar specifically, chocolate, anything sweets, anything like that, I'm still in an abusive relationship with it, because I know that it makes me fatter than I am, and I'm not a fat person. I'm not overweight, but I put on fat obviously if I eat crappy foods. I feel sluggish. It gives me low mood, and yet I'm still in a battle with it. And ultimately, the only thing that's ever worked for me when it comes to my addictions is 12-step fellowships. So I've been to a number of them. And I actually started going to the fellowship for overeaters, and it did actually really work. But the one thing that's prevented me from, I stopped going about a year ago, and I haven't been back since.
Why was that?
Pride. just purely pride. I got to a place where I was doing really well. My eating was better than it's been for a long time. For years, well, probably the best it's ever been in my life, really. I was just eating 3 meals a day, not eating any sugar, moderating the gym. I was doing really, really well. And then I just came to a place where I thought I could do it on my own again. That devil on the shoulder, the addict, the ego, whatever you want to call it, just reared its ugly head. And that was over a year ago now. So I've been in that battle ever since. I've been in that abusive relationship ever since, and it's just crazy, really, because you said you didn't like asking for help, and that is still where I'm at, even now, 10 years into recovery from alcoholism.
But don't you think that's, I mean, this is one of the trips I think about being in recovery. And I'm 6 years as well. I turned 6 years a couple months, about 6 weeks ago, which is great. But I think one of the things, once you're done with drink and drugs, for example, which are, opt-in situations, because in life, you really don't need to drink. A lot of society would have you believe otherwise, but you don't need to drink. You don't need to drug in order to survive. Things like sex and food, I think, are different, because it's not likely that you'll ever go without them. And obsessive compulsive behaviors with money and relationships and codependency, that it's all things like, I get that. Sometimes it feels like you're extinguishing one addiction and just to frick another one. And actually, I think it was a few years ago, you mentioned something about sugar, and I went on a sugar-free thing for about 6 weeks. Yeah. And that was my first kind of inkling into just how pervasive it really is. Like, the whole industry of sugar is nuts. And I always thought I had a food problem. Food was actually the thing that I learned how to control first before alcohol and drugs, because as a young person, you have access to food. It's very rare that you have access to the same levels of alcohol and drugs that I would have needed to be able to control, if that makes sense. But it's not food that I have a problem with, mate, because it's not celery that I find myself binge eating. It's sugar. Yeah. And it's the fact that sugar is in everything, Yeah. It's crazy.
And it does that same thing to your brain that cocaine does. It does that. It gives you the dopamine hit. It gives you the norepinephrine release. So it gives you that feel good factor that your brain is wired to keep repeating over and over again. So you can't, not only are you fighting like the marketing, and you're fighting the fact that it's, like you say, it's in everything. You're actually fighting your genetic makeup. And if you've got one of those brains like I have that loves that, my partner can have 2 glasses of wine and then she can have a cup of tea afterwards. My brain isn't wired up that way, and if you've got one of those brains, then you're gonna overeat sugar, basically. And that isn't for everybody, but I see it a lot in the rooms.
Oh yeah, and the other thing, of course, is that, and I've just in this lockdown, I've been able to ditch the cigarettes for the first time, for the longest time. That's my longest quit so far. But even that, like I was sober and clean for 5 years while still smoking cigarettes, which is nuts until you understand what addiction is. Yeah. So I get the thing about food. It's also, with food, it's a socially acceptable drug as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I just wanted to say as well about the smoking thing, because I think is a really important point, is, over the last few years, I've started to look at people's overall lives, like holistically, like what they're doing, people in recovery specifically, because you might get I might look at a person who's in recovery from alcoholism, say, and they might not be a sugar addict. So I'm thinking to myself, how come he's not a sugar addict and yet that person isn't? And what I've found, like you said, like you get a grip on one and then it pops up in another place. The analogy I use, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You whack one mole down and another mole pops up in another area of your life, and that's where your addiction kind of gravitates towards. And what I've noticed is that people that aren't really that fussed about the sugar will smoke. and people that don't smoke are really into the sugar.
Well,
Or do
I
you know
hate
what I
to
mean?
be greedy, but Jesus, I was into it all, both of them, you know. And sometimes I would do well with one by subjugating the other,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
until it became too much.
yeah.
Um, and so in this lockdown, and I used to joke about this, mate. Like I even helped set up like a nicotine addicts 12-step group here in
Did you?
London. I did, and then I
Oh.
stopped going because I couldn't stop smoking. Um, But so here's the trip. I used to joke, like at some point, I'm gonna need someone to hypnotize me because it's the only way that I'm gonna be rid of it. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? Like it took so much conscious effort, and I think, my parents hated that I smoked. They smoked for 30 odd years and then gave it up at about the time when they caught me, and they were super disappointed. But after a couple of years of recovery, God, they were willing to buy it through duty free for me. Well, as long as it's not a drink or a drug, we don't worry about the cigarettes. And you can buy into that because it isn't as harmful immediately. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And it does feel like, God, how much do I have to give up? Like I've given up the drink, I've given up the drugs. Can't I just have a cigarette? And you know what? If you're happy to smoke and slowly poison yourself and pay through the nose to do it, fair play to you. I was sick of it. I just wasn't able to do it.
yeah,
And I tried, and I'd go for a month without one and then cave. Fast forward to this lockdown when I signed up for like some self-hypnosis course and did it for 4 days. I quit smoking on day 3 of this course, and I haven't had one since. But the desire to smoke has gone. Like,
yeah,
and it took a year and a half of working pretty consistently at a 12-step program to be, neutral around drink and
yeah.
bars and that kind of stuff. Whereas it's bizarre, and I'm keeping an eye on it because I don't want to lull myself into a false sense of security. But like cigarettes do nothing for me, and I loved cigarettes. I couldn't watch a Tarantino film without leaving halfway through to have a durry break.
Yeah.
That's how easily influenced I was.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that the thing with what you've highlighted there, which I completely agree with, is just because you've given up drinking and had, a spiritual experience and you work the program through the 12 steps, doesn't necessarily mean that the 12 steps is going to work for everything. And it can do. I mean, I've definitely seen people stop smoking through the 12 steps. It 100% works for food because I've had that experience myself, and I know a lot of people that are in the 12-step fellowship for overeaters, and it works for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for everybody, and I'm very open-minded to all the other avenues that you can go down. So whether it is hypnosis or whatever avenue you go down to help you with your other vices, I'm all for that personally.
oh, 100%. And it's also the same thing, like, I don't hold a monopoly on recovery. I don't think any one place does. I never did rehab. I didn't come through that channel, but and therefore, because I've not done it, I can't recommend it because I don't have experience. Do I think it's a bad thing? Hell no. I think it's perfect for some people in certain circumstances. And I do know people who have come through rehab facilities, and they say that without it, they couldn't have stayed sober.
Yeah,
So just because it wasn't my experience doesn't mean that it don't work, you know. Um,
absolutely.
and there's no one size fits all. I think when it comes to problems of the mind and things like addiction, what I think we all just crave to have this one easy solution, and it's not like that. Life isn't like that. It's not as simple as just here is your prepackaged solution. And in most cases, it takes a lot of behavioral learning. Like even with 12 steps, it's a lot of learning how to do life in a different way. That first whole year of being sober, gee, I'd never been on a date sober, never seen the All Blacks sober, never done Christmas sober, never done Saturday sober. You have to learn and until it becomes somewhat like body memory, that your mind can recall experience based on sobriety as much as it can on drunkenness.
Yeah, it's definitely about like forming new habits. And I think that when you first come into recovery, I think it's such a huge revelation to not only be abstinent from, from your substance of choice, but also to be surrounded and to meet all these people and be surrounded by these people who are actually doing it. And it just gives you this fire that you can build upon, and you can keep stoking that fire by getting a sponsor, working the steps. But ultimately, I mean, if you look at it from a purely scientific perspective, well, it's quite obvious that you're just changing your behaviors. You're just not putting that drug or that drink or whatever inside your system anymore, or you're just not going gambling, or you're just not having sex, whatever the behavior is, and you're replacing it with other types of behaviors. And it's almost, the way I kind of talk about it is, it's like deprogramming and reprogramming yourself.
Oh, 100%. It is the conscious and the unconscious, right? And that's what the hypnosis is really about. It felt to me after a week where I was walking down the street and not even thinking about it, like I had somehow gone in the back of the matrix and fucked with all the wiring, and just plugged this wrong one into that right one and vice versa.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. And I thought, Jesus, why can't it always be this simple? Now, in fairness, I'm not mad about the fact that I've used completely different things for other addictions. I'm very happy with, where my journey has taken me and the people it's put me into the path of and stuff. But it does, I think that's what a 12-step program really does. It helps to influence the subconscious, And I find that with the sugar stuff, it's like trying to get your subconscious on board with what you actually want, rather than having it act out against your wishes, which is, I think, where we find ourselves, where we were doing so well and then we got caught off guard. I think it's where your subconscious goes on default and acts against like what you're consciously trying to achieve sometimes. I'm studying NLP, maybe you can tell.
Studying what?
I'm studying NLP.
What's that?
Neuro-linguistic programming.
Oh, cool.
So it's similar concepts. That's why, and I'm on furlough, so I've been doing a whole bunch of different things in, furlough to keep me focused and giving me something to do and to look forward to.
Yeah.
But there is something to this, I've been working that same sort of principle with hypnosis and that kind of stuff around sugar. Because, at the beginning of this lockdown, there wasn't a lot open on Deliveroo, but I can tell you there was half a dozen times I ordered nothing but dessert, and not one or two things. I would get like 3 or 4 different types of cake and then go, just absolutely rinse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm exactly the same. Once that thought, I mean, I've always kind of thought that it was a parallel with my alcohol addiction, because I was exactly the same with drink. As soon as that fuck it button was pressed, as soon as the idea came to my mind and I was like, fuck it, I'm having whatever it is I'm having, then all bets are off. I'm going to the shop, I'm going to get whatever I feel that I need to satisfy that craving, and then that's it, I'm done. But the only difference between alcohol and sugar is that I can stop when it comes to sugar. And I think this is the reason why I found it so difficult to commit to a 12-step program or commit to any type of program, really, because I've always got that get out clause in my subconscious that says, well, you're not like you were with alcohol. Once you took a drink of alcohol, there was no telling whether you'd stop that day or whether you'd stop in 2 or 3 days time, and
Right.
Whereas with this, it's like, I'll binge, or I'll just have a little bit of something, and then it might be that I have a little bit of something all throughout the day. There's no kind of set pattern to it, and it's not like I sit on my bed on my own in a room on my own eating ice cream until I'm sick. You know what I mean? But I did do that with alcohol. So this is when you said, I sometimes say to myself, give yourself a break. Like, you've given up this, you've given up that. I say that to my sponsor all the time. I said to him, God, do I have to give up this as well? And he just says, well, how how much do you want peace of mind? He said, you know, you've got so much peace of mind now compared to what you used to have. He said, but think what you could have if you gave this up as well. You know, if this is causing you pain, which it does, ultimately emotional pain. He said, think what you could have if you, and you know, and I have had that experience. And even though, you know, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, I don't have any desire to be enlightened, so to speak. But at the same time, I've done a lot of research and reading into spiritual paths and stuff. And I do understand that if you want to get to that next level, so to speak, or that next place of serenity, you know, that higher place of serenity, that higher place of transcendence, you do have to give these things up. There's no easy path. You know, you can't just get there. You have to give these things up. And one of the main things that all spiritual kind of disciplines advise is to give up the shit food.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done, but even in lockdown, I've looked at a whole bunch of YouTube videos and stuff, and even the amount of sugar that's in food today compared to like 30 years ago, it's gross.
Yeah.
Like I'm actually offended by the shit that's sort of not just available to the masses, but cheap, and it's consumed because it's cheap.
Yeah.
Whereas if you wanted to eat well, it costs more. And not even if you've got a family of 5, it's hard to feed them good food without sacrificing somewhere along the line. I agree with the sugar. The last few months have been very much on. I don't mind about fruit and honey because it's natural.
Yeah.
I've ditched the bread and pasta. I ain't ready to give up potatoes, because I feel like it's a legit vegetable.
Yeah.
And it's also like you do question. Once you're in recovery, you start to question everything. I gave up red meat 2 years ago. I eat 3 day like fish and chicken 3 times, 3 meals a week. The rest of it's vegetarian, and partly because I wanted to do something, because I don't love slaughtering animals.
No.
I do it myself, but I benefit from it. And I wanted to sacrifice without it being impossible, because I wanted to be able to do it,
Yeah.
And that was a gradual over time. I didn't start by giving up, it started with vegetarianism 1 day a week, and I've sort of added to it, and that's what I'm comfortable with. But you're right, like ultimately you can't live an enlightened path whilst slaughtering animals. I don't believe that. I'm happy to move towards it. But and as we say, one thing at a time. And if I can say that this is the last time that I'm giving up nicotine, that will make me so super happy. I'm already super happy that it's been 3 and a bit months or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The sugar is much more under control, but for me it's the freedom. Like with sugar, I don't want to be controlled by something. I was controlled by substances my whole life.
Yeah.
And I want the same freedom when I walk into a supermarket or an off license that I have when it comes to walking into a bar, where nothing is remotely attractive. And it's not that I'm so arrogant to think that I couldn't relapse if I wasn't on top of my game, but it doesn't crush, the thoughts don't crush me, because I'm just happy I'm in the flow of it all, and it doesn't, it's not attractive to me at all. And I want the same thing around food. I've had it much more in the last few months. I also appreciate it's been lockdown, so I'm very much controlling my environment right now, and I don't know what that's going to look like when I join, quote unquote, the real world, once the job situation is a little bit more stable. So, but at least I've got some time under my belt to kind of take that in with me, and I think that is the goal. And if I've learned anything in 6 years of recovery, is that literally anything is possible.
Well, I mean that the lockdown thing has been a real disappointment for me, because I thought that, because as it was becoming more apparent that we were going to be locked down for quite some time, I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to get really fit, to do loads of exercise, stop eating the crap, especially the sugar, and really work on that. And it's been the absolute opposite, really. My exercise has completely dropped off, especially over the last few weeks. I was saying to my partner earlier on, actually, that I'm going to start running again in the morning because, the gyms have closed, which has meant that I've not been going to the gym. I've not really been doing as much exercise as I thought I would. And then my sugar intake is just, I've got absolutely no integrity around food at the moment. I'm sat here at the moment, I've just ate a triple bounty whilst we've been on this podcast. And I'm currently drinking a Pepsi Max cherry. And I was just laughing to myself looking at them in front of me. But the point for me is having the integrity around it, and it's not something that I've realised. It's not something that I can do on my own. I just don't think that I have the capacity to say, right, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to stick to it, because ultimately I always press that fuck it button. And I did a podcast with a guy last year who I think it was called sugaraddiction.com, his website, or sugaraddicts.com, and his take-home message really was that if you want to drop, if you want to stop eating refined sugar, and he was even into fruit as well, which I didn't agree with that, but basically he said if you want to stop eating refined sugar, the only way to go really is to eat vegetables, and to eat predominantly raw vegetables. And I personally think that it can be done with with any vegetables plus fruit. And I share a similar view to yourself with meat. I mean, again, I don't have that integrity around it, because even though I think it's wrong the way that animals are killed, I still do eat it at the minute, and I haven't really made any strides towards stopping eating it. But the way I look at it is, if you eat natural food, if you eat anything that comes out of the ground, then that has just got to be better than eating processed foods. It just has to be.
I mean, yeah. I mean, especially when you start looking at like the ingredients list, and it's just a whole bunch of man-made. And that's the other thing. Most of the sugar that's in food that I find so offensive isn't natural sugar. It's man-made sugar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's why I don't like it. I had a smoothie once, and this is a few years ago, but my colleague was like, you need to watch, there's a lot of sugar in fruit. And I'm like, well, I agree. That's why I make my own smoothies, because it's just the fruit that I put in. I don't like that there's so many companies that add sugar to it, because that's what pisses me off. But you're never going to tell me not to eat fruit. And even if I binge on fruit, I would sooner binge on fruit than chocolate, cheesecake, crisps, and all the stuff that I would have eaten regardless.
Yeah. Well, the difference is as well with fruit. If you put a massive bowl of varied fruits in front of you, and then you put loads of desserts, your brain at some point, when it comes to fruit, you won't want any more. Like it switches off, and you just go, right, I'm done with that. I couldn't keep eating and eating and eating fruit, but if you put desserts in front of me, I could keep eating and eating and eating them. And a podcast that I listened to that was talking about that different phenomenon again was due to the reward pathway, the dopamine reward pathway, because he said that although fruit does have a slight effect on your dopamine reward pathway, because that's how we've evolved, obviously, as hunter-gatherers. Fruit was very scarce, and if you came across it, then you would gravitate towards it. But it doesn't have anywhere near as much of an effect as desserts do.
100%. And I mean, I had a whole thing of small little punnet of raspberries earlier and some pineapple. I can rage on fruit, and I've even really kind of not fallen in love, but sort of really getting into dating vegetables as well. I mean, I've always been pretty good with veggies. I think there's just something about, when you see how much it is so fake, that's what I don't like. Is this the food that's on offer is so fake.
Yeah, it is.
I want to be real.
Yeah.
I want to be a real boy.
Yeah. Well, it's just processed, isn't it? And it's like, I mean, when I did the when I actually did the steps in the Overeaters Fellowship, and when I went through the steps, one of the things that really jumped out at me was how much marketing affects me. So I wrote down how much I'm enticed by the packaging of. So if I look at, say, a Cadbury's caramel, that yellow and blue packet really does something for me. Like it just straight away makes me think I want that. So at that point, when I was doing the program, I was making sure that, because I live with two young kids as well. You say, well, three now. I've got my own daughter. So they have obviously chocolate and crisps and stuff, and it's all in one particular cupboard. And I was having to just, anything that I came across, I was having to move it into that cupboard and just keep it out of the way of my sight, you know. And I had to say to my partner and my mother-in-law, who comes over, and say, you know, please just don't put it in front of me. And that was at the time when I was remaining strong with it. But obviously it's gone a bit pear-shaped since then. But these are the types of measures that an alcoholic would take when they first come into recovery. I mean, you don't go into pubs, do you, when you first newly sober? You don't have alcohol.
I did, but I was told not to.
Yeah.
And I suffered for it.
Well, you do. Yeah, you do. I mean, if it's around you and you don't have alcohol in the house, and you know all those things, and it's the same for whatever it is that you're trying to remain abstinent from. I think it's just a good idea to not have it in the house if you can.
Correct. And I can't have treats in my house. Like, I just can't. Because as strong as I can be about it, at some point, the thought's going to occur to me, hey, didn't you put a pint of ice cream in that freezer?
Yeah.
And, you know, if I could have a couple of spoons of ice cream at a time, it wouldn't be a big deal. But temperance, this is the funny thing. I had no idea what temperance was. I had to ask somebody when I was new to sobriety. Temperance for me was a 3-story super club in Wellington, just off the high street, that I used to go to. And I didn't realize the irony of the name of the club. But there you go. I can't do it. I can't. I would rather go without than to try and kid myself into thinking I can have a couple bites of it, because once it's in me, I'm like a freaking shark with blood in their nostrils. Like, look out. And then I will go send myself out to an off license to get more.
Yeah.
Just can't.
Same. That's exactly what I'm like. Wasn't there a temperance movement that was around at the similar time to the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous? Do you know about that?
No.
Yeah, there was a movement called the temperance, because temperance means abstinence, doesn't it, basically? And there was a movement called the temperance movement, which came up around a similar time, but they disbanded because they started to have more and more rules, you know, whereas Alcoholics Anonymous simplified and just said, look, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, and that's it. You know, if you've got a desire to stop drinking, you're in. With the temperance movement, it was all like there were certain things you had to do, and similar to the Oxford groups in a way, because the Oxford groups had the absolutes, didn't they? Do you know much about that?
No, not much at all, to be fair.
Well, the Oxford groups were what kind of influenced. It was Ebby Thatcher was part of the Oxford groups, and he was the guy that had the conversation with Bill Wilson, and then Bill Wilson took his ideas basically and formed, AA ultimately. But the Oxford groups had what they called the absolutes. So it was like absolute honesty, absolute whatever. I think there was 7 of them in total. And one of the things that Bill Wilson said in some of his early writings was that he realised that being an alcoholic of his type, he thought, well, if all alcoholics are like me, then he said there's absolutely no way that they're going to be able to do anything absolutely other than one thing, and that is to remain abstinent from alcohol. He said, I think step 1 is the only thing that they would be able to do perfectly, and he was just so right.
And not even just alcohol. Shit, I remember someone when I was new talking about how I was, we remained abstinent from all substances, and I was like, what? Like, I think I'd finally come to the idea that I had a drink problem. I was like, you're telling me that I can't smoke weed ever again? I was like, well, no, this is a program of abstinence. Horrified I was. That's how crazy my thinking was.
Yeah.
And I mean, I haven't, but Yeah. It's weird, the kinds of thoughts that we have as addicts. Just anything kind of to like circumvent the rules. Do you know what I mean? Let me find a loophole.
Well,
So
I mean,
I can accept it.
it gets even kind of weirder because I mean, well, obviously I haven't spoken to you about this because I've not been in London for such a long time. But ever since I left London and since I wrote that first book, one of the things that came up was about Bill Wilson's experimentation with LSD. And did you know
Ah,
about did you know about that?
no, this I do know.
Yeah. In the 70s, well, I think it was like in the late 50s initially, but I think it was maybe no, I think it was 1956 actually. I think he first did like the experiment with it. Anyway, long story short, that got me interested in it, and I ended up going down the route of having a psychedelic experience with ayahuasca first, and then psilocybin second over a kind of couple of year period.
Did you?
And, yeah, and and it was life changing in a positive way. It was absolutely immense, like two immense spiritual experiences that I had with these psychedelics, and it was confusing initially because obviously, like you just said, then people had always said to me, no mind or mood altering substances, and then all of a sudden I'm reading that the founder of AA had done LSD trials. He'd written the 12 and 12 as a result of his LSD trials.
Right. Well, yeah, his whole kind
He,
of his spiritual, his lightning bolt experience was belladonna.
Belladonna, exactly. So that's a psychedelic.
So tell
So
us, whereabouts were you? I'm super fascinated, and I listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, and he is somebody who is very much into these psychedelics for the sole purpose of, not to get high, but to get enlightened. Yeah.
yeah, man.
Um,
Well, I mean, that's the reason why I did it. Exactly that reason. And so I think the one thing that I always say as a disclaimer to this is that this is something that even though I advocate it, I only advocate it in the right setting. And I actually did many years of research around this before I actually went and did my first my ayahuasca ceremony. And I travelled to Mallorca to be part of this ceremony, and it was actually the Shipibo tribe, so shaman from the Shipibo tribe in Peru, which are like the original when it comes to ayahuasca. So that was the reason why I did it, because I thought I don't want to miss this opportunity. And
I mean, if you're gonna do it with the OGs, right?
exactly, exactly. And when I was out there, so I had this amazing experience, and as I've spoken on the podcast about this quite a few times, so I won't go into loads of detail, but the top and bottom of it was that I'd split up with my partner, who I'm now engaged to and have a child with. And at the time we'd split up, it was as though I thought that the relationship was over, but then I started to have doubts, and I really wanted to know whether I was supposed to be with this person. So that was the kind of question that I went with. And then there was other stuff around my relationship with my parents and just relationship with myself more than anything. And over the process of these two ayahuasca ceremonies, it dealt with all those issues. So I came away knowing exactly what I needed to know. And also what happened was I met a guy who was sat next to me in the ceremony, a guy called Luke, who was from Manchester, where I'm from. And it was like he was my brother from another mother, this guy. He was definitely, we had definitely been friends in past lives, or whatever, however you want to look at it. And me and him then did a psilocybin, magic mushrooms, what you would call like a spirit quest kind of thing in the woods, a couple of years later. And that again was another phenomenal experience that just cemented all the stuff that I'd learned during my ayahuasca ceremony. But what I've now kind of come to learn a few years later, and also through doing a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, which was silent for 10 days, I've learned that these medicines, technologies, psychedelics, they are absolutely unbelievable tools for spiritual awakening and for spiritual experience. But you can't get past the fact that you still have to do the work afterwards. It doesn't fix
Right.
it doesn't fix anything. It just shows you what you need to work on. And for me, the 12 steps does exactly the same thing. You know, it's kind of like, I'm really glad I had the experiences, and I would definitely recommend it to people if they think it's the right thing for them to do. But I would always say, look, you know, just go with the thought that whatever you uncover, you could uncover this anyway, like of your own volition, through meditation, through the 12 steps. So it's kind of like that, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'd say it's amazing, but at the same time, I'd say you don't necessarily need to do it if you feel like you can get what you need to get from just working the program.
Yeah, and you know, the rebellious part of me. I did literally every drug that I could find. I've never done ayahuasca, and anything that I'm told I cannot do, of course, instantly I want to do it.
Just sorry to interrupt you, because it just went like the connection was lost for a minute.
Okay.
Are you still there?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. You just disappeared for a minute. So just say that again, off the back of what I said to you.
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, the thought of doing it has. Yeah. I mean, I did literally every drug I could think of, literally every drug that I could get my hands on, and some of it was legitimate. What felt like, I say legitimate, it was illegitimate. It felt like a spiritual experience, but they were synthetic drugs, so it wasn't authentic, it wasn't organic. And there is something in me, I don't know if it's the rebellious side, that just when I'm told that, you know, we abstain from any mind-altering substances, I want to find the loophole. But there's also this part of me, and I mean, I like what you said about, you know, if you still have to do the work. You know, it's a bit like, to me, it sounds like watching a trailer. But if you really want to find out how to do it and what really happens, you still need to watch the entire film, right? And that requires a bit more effort on your part. And as glossy and as fun as a trailer can be, I don't know. Because I think the other thing too is I'd go there with a question, and I might even get like a super clear understanding of the answer and go, cool, that's great. But I'm gonna have another question, and what I it's not fear, but what I wouldn't want to have happen is for me to try and find an external resource to have to find the answer to those questions.
Well, the positive thing about doing it was, I mean, to put anybody's mind at rest that might be thinking about potentially doing any of these medicines, and especially ayahuasca, as far as I'm concerned, is I did it, and it did what I wanted it to do, and then I don't feel like I need to do it again. So
wow, okay.
That
must be new experience as an addict.
Yeah, well, I mean, it tells me that it's not addictive for a start, and B, it tells me that if you're willing to go there and be vulnerable and open up to what this medicine is going to teach you, then it will answer those questions for you. And ultimately, that is all you could ever do, isn't it? Is be totally open and be totally honest. And I think, you know, I was in a room with, I think it's about 16 or 17 people that were going through this journey together, and I was, at least I seemed like in the room, the first one to go under, because I drank quite quickly, like what was one of the first people to drink the medicine, and then it felt as though I went into my journey quite quickly. And I think the reason for that is because I've dealt with the majority of shit in my life. You know, I've excavated all that crap, whereas a lot of people in that room had gone there with a lot of, you know, they had loads of baggage that they were going to have to work through, whereas the only stuff that I was really working through was kind of recent stuff.
Right.
There was a bit of childhood stuff, definitely, but that kind of got dealt with quite quickly. But I think it's just massively important to understand that, like you said before, when I was taking drugs in the past, they were synthesized spiritual experiences, and the way that I look at them now, they were just taking me towards my rock bottom. Whereas anything that I do now, and if I did, and I don't know whether I will take any again in the future, but if I ever did, it would only be because I felt like there was a block somewhere, and I needed it unblocking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel now as though, well, if I was to take ayahuasca again or any other kind of traditional medicine, I would go for the jugular. I would go there with the intention of dealing with my addictions. And every time I've had that thought, so when I was on ayahuasca, I did have that thought, and it was like the pit of hell opened up, and I was like, nope, not going there, thank you very much. And then when I was on the psilocybin, it did pretty much the same thing. I had this momentary thought where I thought, should I go into the root of my addictions? And again, it was like I actually got this clown face came up, like a red clown face came up in front of my face, as if to say, danger, danger, if you really want to go there. You know what I mean? I was like, no thanks. So I think if I was to, I would go and do it for that reason only. And there are reports of people, you know, going and using these medicines to overcome addiction, you know, to kind of literally rewire the brain. So whether that
as well,
and trauma, yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think trauma is at the root of most people's addictions, but not all.
I agree with that, and I think the reason why I don't entertain ayahuasca outside of it being I'm attracted to it because it's a loophole. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it is there for people to kind of, if I was honestly seeking, I think that would be a different story. But I want to do it mainly because it sounds interesting. And I want to do it because we're having a conversation about it. But I certainly don't think about it outside of Joe Rogan's podcast, which says to me that I'm not doing it. If I was deciding to do it today, that wouldn't be for the right reasons, you know? But I think
they say that she calls you. They say that Mother Ayahuasca calls you if you're meant to take it. And I do, believe it or not, I do relate to that, because I did get this feeling. Like, my mate in recovery told me about it initially, and I said to him, there's absolutely no chance that I would ever do that, because it's a relapse every day of the week. And he was kind of like, no, you know, it's, you know, you need to be more open-minded. Well, I started to research it at that point, and then a couple of years later, it wasn't even straight away when I was reading about it. It was a couple of years later, I just started getting this pull to do it, you know, and I can't really explain it. But now I've had, well, you know, once I'd had the experience, I understood that the reason why I got the pull was because it had to happen at that particular time.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I think we always have to be a little fluid about what, you know, and open-minded, right? Because I'm pretty solid in my recovery. I'm 6 years. I'm sure every person who's had the kind of recovery I've had at 6 years thinks they're going to be sober forever. And categorically, that ain't true.
No.
And categorically, people don't always do it in this way. I've met people who were probably far better addicts and alcoholics than I am, and they relapsed at long periods of time. And, you know, it's not as finite as we like to believe. And so just because I'm quite resolute in my opinion in my recovery today doesn't mean that it won't expand into something different 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, we don't know what's around the corner, and we don't know. Interestingly, like there's been a number of times in my recovery where I've been very judgmental towards somebody, even if it's just in my mind. I've really judged a person, and you know, often what's happened is I've ended up doing exactly the same thing myself further down the line. So the way I look at it now is I tend to just not have an opinion on these things. You know, when it comes to anybody else's recovery, I just think, well, whatever works for you, you know, and if this works for me, like as I've always said on the podcast, this is just what works for me. And at this moment in time, I have no plans whatsoever to go down the psychedelic route at the moment. But also, very interestingly, I actually went to my first 12-step psychedelic meeting on Wednesday, a couple of Wednesdays ago. Yeah, there's been a movement now that's begun, which is 12 steps in conjunction with psychedelic medicines, and there's a Zoom meeting on a Wednesday afternoon. And yeah, I went to this meeting. There was only 4 or 5 people there. Interestingly, there was a person that I actually knew from London, not mentioning any names, but there was a person on there that I already knew, and that person was thinking about exploring psilocybin. And it was just really interesting because people were sharing their experiences of ayahuasca and psilocybin and any other medicines that they've used, and how they incorporate that into their recovery with the 12 steps. So it was weird, really, because it was like, I was like, oh my God, like I can finally share about my own experiences, because obviously I don't go to 12-step meetings and share about this stuff, because I don't think that would be
Right.
the right thing to do. You know, as far as a newcomer's concerned, I would never discuss, you know, this stuff with them, because I don't think it's a decision that you could make until you're at least 4 or 5 years sober anyway, before you'd even think about it. But, you know, Bill Wilson himself, he actually encouraged his own sponsee to do it, you know, when he was doing LSD, because he found it so therapeutic. And another interesting thing was that Bill Wilson said that, you know, that white light experience that he had, which you said was potentially due to his belladonna treatment. I didn't know that he said that his experience with LSD was very, very similar. So whatever it was that happened to him on that day, whether it was psychedelic induced or not, or just naturally occurring, it was tapping into that same higher power for him. And that has definitely been my experience. You know, these psychedelic medicines have tapped into exactly the same thing that I've tapped into through meditation on a number of occasions. And I've always, these spiritual experiences that I've had, whether on psychedelics or not, have always been to do with the interconnectedness of all things and this power that just pervades everything, you know. And we call it a higher power, God, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But that for me has been cemented now. There's no way that anybody could ever, you know, convince me that there isn't this power greater than myself.
Well, look, I always kind of thought there are, you know, nearly 8 billion people on this planet, 7 billion of which believe in a God of some description, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's weird how disconnected we can sometimes be when it comes to religion. Now, I'm not a religious man. I love 70% of it, and the 30% of it is over to the rest of the people who follow it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But I do kind of think, like, you can't tell me that 7 billion people, even if they don't all follow the same religion, aren't tapping into the same part of themselves. Do you know what I'm saying? And even people like us who are asked to you know, look for our own conception of God, which I much prefer, I think aren't we all kind of doing that? Like, you could tell me tomorrow that what I'm doing neuropathically is accessing a part of my brain located here, and that is the same part that all people who practice religion are accessing when they're in prayer or meditation. And I would go, okay, that sounds about right. Now, whether there's going to be science to back that up, I don't really care. I don't mind, to be fair. But
Now, well, this is what Joe Rogan talks about all the time, doesn't he, when he's discussing DMT, and he talks about you know, your third eye, the pineal gland opening up and giving you access to these other dimensions, and he believes that is where all the world's religions come from, you know. And when you look, there's so much evidence to suggest that people like Moses and, you know, and all the other saints from the Bible, that they were all smoking marijuana, and there was the acacia bush. They believe now that the burning bush might have been the acacia bush giving off DMT, which was the reason why the Ten Commandments were formulated, you know. So when you look back in history, these medicines, and like in the Greek, what was it called now? I forget the name of the brew, but they used to drink this psychedelic brew back in, you know, 3,000 years ago, and have these massive spiritual, like, you know, gatherings. It's been going on for hundreds of thousands of years with the Aborigines, and it's not something that you can take lightly. You can't just go and abuse these medicines. Well, you could, but, you know, it wouldn't be the same as being able to abuse cocaine every night of the week. It just wouldn't work in that way. So unless you've got some sort of spiritual path that you're following or spiritual desire, I don't think these medicines would work for people anyway.
No, I really do think that they are there to heal and to enlighten and empower. And actually, there's a series on Netflix at the moment called The Business of Drugs, and one of the episodes is around MDMA, and it talks about, he was German chemist who was in America. Well, I think, was he German? Maybe I'm making that up. He was a pharmacist, chemist, and he actually created MDMA. And it was initially for trying to, not cure, but he was testing it on trauma patients who were, it's in a synthetic way that ayahuasca is supposed to do in terms of curing and healing organically. And I do think there is something to that. If you are honestly and earnestly seeking that kind of an experience.
Yeah.
And that's where honesty comes from too. Like, I was very dishonest in all of my seeking prior to getting sober. I did it for all of the wrong reasons. Plenty of good intentions, none of the right reasons.
Well, MDMA's now come back full circle, hasn't it? Because they're trialing it in America now for that exact reason that you just mentioned. You go to a trained psychotherapist who will give you a certain amount of MDMA, and then it's essentially talking therapy. And I'm sure you used to take MDMA like I did, which was basically just smash a load of it and just...
What would ever give you that idea?
Love everybody, all night long. I mean, for me, that was the first time I ever took ecstasy. It was a spiritual experience. It was like the first time I'd ever felt this unconditional love for absolutely everybody around me. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do this every single night for as long as I possibly, well, forever, and I was trying to get everybody to take it, because I just thought the world needs this. And it's understandable why that happens, because like you said, when you've got an inability to be vulnerable and an inability to be honest, and all of a sudden you take this substance that allows you to be that way, well, how freeing is that? That is, like, we all want to be that free all the time, but we've got these egos that stand guard of that vulnerability. And when that ego gets dissolved, you can just be who you really are naturally. And I think that recovery does that over a long period of time. It chips away at the ego, it dissolves the ego bit by bit by bit, and enables you to just be the real you.
Yeah. I mean, if I was to ask myself now, I feel like there's nothing that I feel is unresolved in me that any sort of seeking could really be earnest or honest, outside of I just want to try it because I've always been curious.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which I feel somewhat diminishes it. But again, I don't really have it. Like you said, I don't have an opinion. I think, from what I've read about it and what I've seen about it, I think it could be incredibly beneficial. That was one of the reasons why they were so upset that they classified MDMA in the 80s as being, class A, is it? I think in America.
Class A. Yeah.
He was what he really wanted was for it to be used in the medical community to help treat people, and instead they outlawed it, and it became an underground party drug instead, which. I don't think he's alive anymore, the man who created it, but his widow is saying that, that really was counter to what they were trying to achieve, which is sad.
It is sad, but I'm just really glad that it has come back around now, and it is being, looked into and used in the way that it was meant to. And again, it just goes back to open-mindedness. I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm not going to start going for MDMA therapy simply because I used a lot of MDMA in my drinking days, and I've done the majority of the work in terms of looking at my childhood, looking at like all the ways in which I tick, and all those character defects and stuff. And I'm quite happy to just continue working the program. And, you know, if a traditional medicine, you know, comes along at some point in the future and it seems like the right thing to do, then I would definitely be open-minded to do that. But I don't feel like I need to do it at this moment in time. And that's a nice place to be. It's a nice place to have had those experiences, to be able to talk about them. And it's really nice to be able to talk to people like yourself about it and not feel judged, because, you know, the fact is you come across as being open-minded to the idea of it, which is really nice.
Hey, look, there are plenty of things on this earth that are great for other people and not necessarily great for me. That doesn't mean that I have to think lowly of them.
No.
And again, I think it comes back to this idea, like, especially for people who have followed a 12-step program, there is this, sometimes it feels like a pervading idea that if you don't do it that way, it's wrong. And again, like, I've used self-hypnosis this time for smoking, which is something I couldn't use a 12-step program for before. And I kind of feel like all of this stuff is out there to be used in order to be better versions of ourselves, whatever it takes, you know.
Yeah.
As long as we're not hurting other people. I don't think it's certainly none of my business how people choose to get well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that the flip side to that coin as well is that I can't stand fundamentalism. Like, people that think that, you know, that theirs is the only way that something can be done, and you get that in recovery sometimes. Unfortunately, you get people that, you know, they use the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book as though it's a Bible, and they say, you know, whatever's in these first 164 pages is the gospel, and anything else outside of that is, they're not interested in it. And I'm the total opposite to that. I just think that there's so much more wisdom out there that can be used in addition to the Big Book. I think the Big Book is absolutely amazing, and it certainly explains my condition in those first 164 pages and the solution to my condition, which I follow on a daily basis. And the stories are great. But, you know, even just the 12 and 12 is a fantastic book. And I was sponsored through the Big Book and the 12 and 12 at the same time, and it really helped me. And I do loads of extracurricular reading. You know, I'm constantly learning more and more about meditation and about prayer, and, you know, and also neuroscience as well. Like, I'm really interested in the science of the brain, and I'm really interested in the two, you know, I'm actually writing a book at the moment, and the title is All Is Now, the Science and Spirituality of Consciousness. So I've made a deliberate attempt to compare and contrast the scientific explanations of consciousness, the spiritual explanations of consciousness, and, you know, and how they can actually work together. And it's been fantastic learning this stuff. You know, it's really broadened my knowledge.
And you know what, like, I mean, I did some, when I was learning about self-hypnosis, and after the fact, I thought, oh, this is legit just the Western version of meditation, which is a typically Eastern practice. Do you know what I mean? It's meditation with intent. Whereas I go into meditation not necessarily with the desired outcome or even a question, though sometimes I do. Whereas with hypnosis, there was a specific ideal state that I was trying to imagine as part of that meditation or hypnosis. But the trance is exactly the same. There's so much, and it's interesting. One is considered pseudoscience, and one is slightly more held in regard by the science community. And I think, I mean, if only you knew. I mean, Jesus, this is the same thing with a different name on it.
Yeah, definitely. So I just wanted to ask you about, well, really, you know, like, what's your life in recovery been like since you first came in? And obviously I was there when you first came into recovery. I remember your first kind of few meetings, and you just kind of took to it, really. You was ready to do the work, I think.
Was that your impression? Because I wasn't really.
That was my impression. Yeah, so you did a good job of pulling the wool over my eyes.
Hey, look, I'd spent 27 years pulling the wool over people's eyes, including my own. Yeah?
Yeah.
I was seasoned, accomplished.
Yeah.
When I first came in, I was resistant and I was reluctant. I think because I didn't want to be an addict or an alcoholic. and I didn't want that to be my problem. But I did go to meetings, I think because I saw people they seemed like content, peaceful, happy, even smiling, doing crazy shit. And I was incapable of looking at people in the eye at the time. Far too concerned by what people were thinking of me, and I'm sure they really weren't thinking of me, but that's what it felt like. But I did start to get to know people as you go to meetings and stuff, and there were people who came in after me who were getting well before me because they were doing the work. And I kind of look at a 12-step program is similar to a lot of ways in plenty of the other areas of my life of which I found success. So if you want to do something in life, it's going to require you to put a hell of a lot of work in, not once or twice, but like daily to varying degrees. It helps to have a mentor, somebody who's walked the path before you, who you can call and who gives you feedback and suggestions. And like a peer group, like a support group of people who are doing the same things you're doing, who have the same goal as you. And I have that I'm a musician, I have a music mentor, I'm a writer, and I have a writing mentor. But when it came to sobriety, that was the first instance I had of asking somebody for help, having somebody like we call them sponsors, but somebody that you can call and talk to who's done what you've done before, who's also wanting to be sober and has been sober longer than you and has worked the 12 steps, and can give you like practical suggestions when you're feeling a bit off. And I think establishing those relationships and being honest and showing up consistently, helping out, being of service, doing all those things, like the suggestions, all the ones that I kind of didn't take at the beginning, I did eventually take them all on, because it became apparent to me that if you're an addict, an alcoholic, and you're not drinking anymore, shit can only go one of two ways. You go right off the rails and probably relapse. And for me, relapse was likely to end in another suicide attempt. Or you buckle down in the midst of all the discomfort of facing yourself and you do the work. And the work is actually not hard. I'm hard. I'm a difficult person, or I was back then. I'm much more amenable now. But I was hard work because I was entitled and I was fearful and I was really scared, I think, that I was going to do all this work on myself and find out that I was a horrible person. And actually what I found out was that I was an unwell person who had some very questionable coping mechanisms. But they were coping mechanisms that I'd learned in some part to protect myself. I was a very guarded person. And so finding all that out was chiefly quite an education for me. I'd never been to therapy. So for me, it was like, holy shit, I could understand my behaviors in black and white for the first time. And they didn't seem so scary when I had written them out either. Sometimes embarrassing, I could be petty. I could be awkward, uncomfortable. But it does help. I think part of the reason why it seems so Everest when I first came in is because I didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
And as you work through the steps, you start to break that down. And understanding, now I know what's going on in my head. This is why I act out in anger at authority figures. This is why I was incapable of opening up emotionally in relationships. This is why I envied or resented my brother. Yeah. And once you have all of that groundwork down, you start to understand your own patterns. And I think that was the first part. I was like, oh, this isn't as scary as I thought. Also, maybe I'm not the biggest piece of shit like I thought I was either. And the rest of the process is really about setting right the wrongs of the past, which is also uncomfortable, but incredibly freeing. And I've talked maybe once or twice already in this convo about freedom and peace of mind, and I said I would come back to it, but for me it really is the most incredibly glorious, I say fucking glorious, which is not a word I use often. But peace of mind is not to be, overrated. I was somebody who spent 27 years with so much noise in my head. Drinking and drugging was the only logical escape from that much noise. And now I have tools and resources where I don't have to pick up a drink or a drug, but I have an incredible amount of like calm, peace. I've even in this lockdown, which is uncomfortable, isolation is not great for an addict. Being told what to do, we don't love that either. And yet I've been flexible. I've been amenable. I've dealt to other things that I've been trying to get rid of for a long time. And that's not something I would have been able to do 6 years ago. I've learned what tenacity is. I've learned that just because I work hard doesn't mean that I'm entitled to have everything that I want. And that actually that's okay. I've learned not to wrest happiness or satisfaction out of other people or other places or things. And that actually, if I focus on staying in the present, then everything's going to be okay. Even right now, I'm on furlough. I'm in furlough to October. I'm not confident I'm going to have a job to go back to. I could be freaking out. There is a small part of me that wants to. But what I've learned is that freaking out's not going to help. I can be practical and work on the things that I have in front of me at the moment to give myself the best shot of employment once this furlough situation is over. So that's all I'm doing, And because I'm free of all of that craziness, it's allowed me to not just get rid of some of my crap, but help other people a lot in this lockdown, which is really rewarding. Connect with, not just other addicts, but friends and family members I haven't really spent a lot of time talking to just because we have busy lives. I've outlined my second novel. I've outlined my second album. I've written a remix EP. I've done a course with Harvard. All these things. The past 6 years have been amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it?
I mean, if you'd told me, and this is the catch-22, you'd told me that first time I probably bumped into you, right, that you said, look, Ra, you could have written a book, you could have released this album, you could have traveled to 30-odd countries, you could have, been promoted to this and blah, 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 blah. You could have all of that if you just worked the program. I wouldn't have believed you. That's the catch-22, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have believed you. And I didn't even have that much faith. All I cared about was not dying. That was enough for me at the beginning to go, if I don't drink today, I'm not going to die and I have a chance at tomorrow. And my life is much bigger than that very granular goal, but that's where it started, I've learned to be cool with who I am. That's miraculous. So determined to get out of my own skin for 27 years. It's nice that I really don't think about what people think of me much at all. I'm aware of my strengths. I'm also aware of my weaknesses. And I know what I want. I know how to communicate those wants and needs in a way that's healthy and not, manipulative or dark. It's mind-blowing, really. It's mind-blowing. The funny thing is, in the past 6 years, outside of the recovery circle, I've met a shit ton of people, and most of them have no real idea. They know that I don't drink, and some of my colleagues, for example, at the company that I work for, they don't know me as anyone other than this guy, which is crazy. They trust me to do things like go to these different countries and help our clients with this and this and this. And part of me does think sometimes, God, if they'd have seen me 6 years ago, they wouldn't have trusted me for shit.
Yeah.
I could be trusted to turn up, whether I was coherent and sober, question mark. But that's what I've learned, like responsibility, which sounds kind of like the anti-fun. And I suppose responsibility isn't fun, it's just responsibility. But hey, look, and this is something, people like you and I, we kind of did as we pleased. Fuck the consequences, fuck the wreckage. We'll feel guilty about it, and maybe if we're in the mood, we can apologize for it. But this teaches us like discipline and all these things that don't sound like a lot of fun, but actually, once you do them with regularity, like wonderful things happen. You know, I don't have the crazy highs anymore. What I do have is a great sense of serenity and calm, and that allowed me to write a book in 5 weeks. I've never done that before. I've never been to all these countries. You, my friend, have congratulations, by the way, on becoming a father.
Thank you.
That to me is the final frontier, right? Like,
Yeah.
but that's incredible because the old us, even if we'd had children, it's a sad fact for us alcoholics and addicts that it's hard to be a present parent and be a practicing addict at the same time, and God willing, your child or children will never have to see that.
Well, it's the final frontier, and it's interesting. Like, even though I got sober long before she was born, that was the sole reason why I got sober, was because I never wanted to be an active alcoholic with a child, and it's incredible. It's like the journey has just started again. All of a sudden, like, I've had 10 years of recovery, and then it's like it's just began again on this new journey with this little baby who is just absolutely amazing, and and I'm present with her every day, and COVID has been a blessing in disguise for me, because obviously I would have only had 2 weeks paternity leave, and it's turned out that I've been at home for 5 months every single day with her, and we've already got this amazing bond, and it's just incredible. And I owe that all to recovery, because I know like I did the podcast with my dad, which was the last episode of the first season. And, he was, after the podcast, when we were talking about, my childhood and stuff, it was clear that he's recognizing now how much he missed, that he kind of sees that I'm so hands-on and so present with my daughter. And he definitely wasn't when I was a child, because he was drunk, and my mum, I think he made a quip about, oh, your mum wouldn't let me anywhere near you, and it was, but that was true, like my mum obviously wouldn't let my dad.
Smart lady, yeah.
Yeah, she wouldn't let my dad like have me, on his own, because she would probably be worried about whether he was going to be able to look after me properly and stuff, and. That's fine to know that now. I think ultimately recovery is about breaking a lot of patterns, a lot of family patterns, and we're breaking that together. And the great thing is that my dad can now be a sober and present grandfather to his granddaughter, which is amazing. So it's been brilliant, man. It's like I highly recommend it when you meet the right person. It's just a complete blessing.
I have, my motivations have changed. My desire to have children still hasn't gotten any stronger as I've gotten sober. But look, I also think there is something very paternal about the way in which people who are sober help other people to get sober. And I feel like all of the selfishness that I had as a practicing alkie, I've learned to overcome, but I do see that parents are, I resented my parents. My parents are wonderful people, but the amount of sacrifice I realize that parents give, I will never be in a position to judge a parent for anything, anywhere, ever. I feel like it's a sacrifice that I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to make it, but I do have what's that?
It's a thankless task.
Well, yeah. But it's also like, I take on responsibilities for commitments that are like, for example, I have a commitment within a fellowship for 2 years, and that seemed very taxing and time intensive. But for a lifetime commitment, that's pretty admirable, I never appreciated my family as an alcoholic. I'm very appreciative of them now, and we have a much stronger relationship, much more honest relationship, living on the other side of planet Earth than I ever had with them living under their roof.
Yeah,
which is ironic. But I'm consistently blown away. I do have my twin brother has 2 kids. My sister just had her first daughter as we went into lockdown. on the other side of the world, of course. But, you know, I have a godson as well, and I can be present with those kids in a way that I just would not have been able to do, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
That's nice.
it's the, like you said a minute ago about the selfishness. It's just a general over time dissolving of that ego, which dissolves the selfishness as well, you know, and you become more responsible, less selfish until you reach a point. Well, at least I reached a point in my life where I was kind of like, okay, I'm ready to have children now because I know that I can give them my full attention. You know, I know that I've realized that, you know, all the material things that I thought were going to make me happy are not going to make me happy. You know, the fame that I was always seeking would never have made me happy anyway, because I had glimpses of it and it didn't fulfill that, you know, fill that void. It was, I just, you know, I'd come to that place of realization. Oh, well, it's not just a place of realization. It's like, you know, like how they say in the rooms, awareness, acceptance, action, the 3 A's. It was like I was in that awareness for years, and then I finally accepted that the happiness that I was seeking and the peace of mind that I'd gained was all due to love, and it was all due to being present, and it was all due to helping others. And I just thought, well, you know, that is essentially what you're doing as a parent 24/7. You're just being of service to your children. And I was ready for that, you know, because I'm not going out to pubs, I'm not going out to clubs, I'm not out with my mates every night of the week. Yes, I go to meetings, but that doesn't completely dominate my life anymore. And I was just ready for it. And when you're ready, you just know. And I'm sure, I mean, how old did you say you were? 20? Are you in your 30s now, or are you?
I'm 33, yeah.
33. So I mean, you're still young, really, in comparison to, you know, to a lot of fathers out there. You know, there's plenty of time for it to happen, and I'm sure you'll reach a place where you'll just be like, yeah, man, I'm ready to be a dad.
Well, even going back to the whole ayahuasca thing, like I'm pretty secure in who I am, but again, it comes with a lot of being open-minded. I have no idea I don't know what's going to happen by the end of this year, let alone, you know, 2, 3, 5 years down the track. And one thing I've learned is to never decide on a particular outcome, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, one of the great things about being in recovery is it teaches you all the qualities that make a good parent, you know. It's almost a shame I don't want to. I think I'd make a good parent.
I think you would as well. I think that you know, when the time comes, it's like everything happens in your higher power's time and not your own, doesn't it? And as you just said, then you never know what's around the corner. I didn't know that I was going to meet my fiance. I mean, you know, the mad story there is that we actually met when we were 12 years old, and she was the first girl I ever fell in love with at that age, you know, and, you know, 20 odd years later, we ended up getting together. And
no way.
Yeah, if you'd have told me that was on the cards, and at the time, I was living in London, I was living in a 2-bedroom flat with a person who I didn't particularly get on with very well. You know, all I was doing, my life revolved around going to meetings. I was going to 6 or 7 meetings a week. All my friends were in the rooms, you know, it was all just revolved around recovery, and I didn't really have that bridge to normal living. And then I met Adele, and then I moved from London up to the Midlands, and before you know it, I've got 2 stepkids, I've got a baby of my own, I'm engaged to be married. I mean, I should have got married on July the 4th, but it got cancelled because of COVID. So, you know, I'm living this 2.4 children life in the suburbs, and all I wanted to be 10 years ago was a famous DJ.
I was just about to say. And actually, that was one of the things I remember distinctly, because you were pals, I think, with someone that I was introduced to very early on.
Yeah.
And it was, I got to say, it was refreshing for me to see people who were DJs and had tattoos.
Yeah.
Seriously, because there was, you know, at 20, I thought my fucking life was over.
I
thought, I'm going to turn into some, you know, vegan librarian, no friends kind of. Actually, the vegan thing doesn't upset me anymore, but back then I really thought I was in for no life, and actually I have a much better one. But it was refreshing to see there were people who I considered, I hate to use this word, but cool, you know. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just because, part of it when I went the first time, I thought it was all going to be old people, old men
Yeah.
sitting in a circle waxing lyrical about misery and stuff, and it wasn't.
Well,
Um,
that word that you use, cool, as well. I mean, cool for me is embodied by the person who is comfortable in their own skin. I can look at anybody, and it doesn't matter how they dress, it doesn't matter how they talk. It's about if they're comfortable in their own skin, and if they are comfortable in their own skin, I would class that person as cool. And I've met some of the coolest people in the rooms because for that reason and that reason alone, and you just think that's inspirational. So I'm glad I had that effect on you in your early days, because there's been many people like that have had that effect on me as well.
And, I think I was desperate to be cool. I mean, if you ask most of the people I came up with, they would probably say that I fit that category, but you don't ever feel that way. And
No.
even in the times you do, it's not enough, right?
Yeah.
And now I like to think, similar to what you've just said, the only thing cool about me is just how cool I am with who I am. And I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And I judge that measurement as always based on how much I don't think about myself, which is hardly ever at all. It's great. I love it.
That's what it all revolves back to, is that selflessness, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think that's a nice way to end the podcast, actually, Rawiri, because the selflessness is essentially dropping that ego is what is I think the path that we're both walking.
I agree, mate.
Thanks very much for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, just look underneath the podcast at a range of links to mutual aid organisations. Please don't forget that you can support the podcast at patreon.com/lifeinrecovery, and if you go to the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk, you'll see links to all my social media and all my books. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.